The woman flees barefoot across the sodden earth, her feet sinking into the mud churned by recent rain. Her chest heaves with ragged breaths, each one a fire in her lungs, as the clamor of pursuit swells like a gathering storm behind her. Through the veil of dawn mist, torches flare to life, casting erratic shadows that dance across the faces of advancing warriors, their forms hulking and relentless, shields slung low over shoulders. Still, it is the year AD 845, and the air hangs thick with the acrid bite of smouldering thatch, a bitter shroud heavier than the fog rolling in from the Seine. Beyond the haze of smoke, she catches a desperate glimpse of the river's silver thread, her solitary path to fleeting sanctuary. Farther still, across the dark horizon where black sails loom like spectres, the spires of power. To them, the true spoils of war transcend glittering hoards of silver or plundered relics. What shatters an enemy's resolve is the seizing of their women, the very threads of their lineage and legacy. And this woman, her fingers white-knuckled around the frayed edges of her tattered gown, embodies the prize their chieftain demands unharmed, a living emblem of conquest yet to unfold. If tales of such veiled chronicles stir your curiosity, as they do mine, I invite you to subscribe and share the corner of the world from which you watch. It is a profound joy to witness this fellowship. The monks of Saint-Denis, those vigilant scribes of calamity, would commit to vellum the harrowing events of that fateful dawn when Ragnar Lothbrok, equal parts mythic phantom and merciless scourge, unleashed his armada of 120 dragon-proud vessels upon the Frankish shores. Their accounts dwell, as one might expect, on the carnage and the crippling ransoms exacted, but they linger too on the subdued echoes of the raid's cruel epilogue, the procession of seized wives and daughters, herded toward the waiting longships amid wails that pierced the fog like the cries of souls already consigned to the deep. Etched in the margins of their illuminated pages, almost as an afterthought amid the illuminations of saints and serpents, lies a stark annotation. Some were consigned to oblivion, never to return. Envision the torment of that threshold moment, standing amid the embers of your ravaged hearth, bargaining with fate itself, where coin might redeem a husband, a brother, or an entire hamlet from the pyre, yet no treasure on earth could reclaim the sanctity of your own unyielding spirit. The ledger of Viking depredations extends far beyond the thunder of axes and the gleam of extorted rivers of silver. It unfurls as a somber archive of human anguish inflicted upon women thrust into concubinage by force, paraded as emblems. To the Norse marauders, these were no mere byproducts of battlefield frenzy. They constituted deliberate instruments of subjugation, forging dominion not only through iron and flame, but through the indelible scars upon the psyche. To grasp the fuller tapestry, draw back the veil to the sweeping panorama of Norse incursions. From the waning breaths of the 8th century through the 11th, the sleek silhouettes of longships cleaved the waves, striking terror from the fjords of Scandinavia to the heartlands of Europe. Lindisfarne in 793, serving as the ominous overture to this symphony of strife. What etched their ferocity into the annals of time was not raw savagery alone, but its measured intent. To instill perpetual dread in men's hearts, to harvest fortunes in plunder, and to dismantle societies by commodifying their women, rendering them chattel in a merciless exchange. Yet how do we unearth these truths from the dust of ages? They endure not in sanitized tomes of academia. Dudo of St. Quentin, in the 10th century, alludes with restrained fury to the desecrations wrought upon the noble matrons of despoiled realms. The annals, even the Icelandic sagas, woven centuries later with a veneer of valorous pride, confront the abductions and coerced unions with unflinching candor, framing them as badges of a chieftain's unyielding prowess. Skeptics among scholars caution of embellishment of monastic pens likening Norse foes to the biblical scourges of antiquity, inflating atrocities to fit scriptural molds. Yet the soil itself bears witness, unyielding and impartial. DNA analyses of ancient bones unearthed in Dublin, York, and Orkney disclose abrupt surges of Scandinavian lineage markers, threading through female remains with frequency rivaling the male. More disquieting still, these skeletal echoes whisper of preludes to captivity, etched lines of nutritional deprivation, fractures mended in haste, all hallmarks of lives already bowed under the yoke of bondage long before the longships arrived. It is in the crucible of these captives that the abyss deepens into unplumbed dread. Thralldom among the Vikings was no haphazard excess. It pulsed as the lifeblood of their enterprise. Enslaved women toiled at hearths and looms, tilled the unforgiving earth, And above all, for ambitious Jarls bore forth legions of heirs to swell the ranks of labourers and warriors alike. Countless were consigned to the shadowed role of concubines, their bodies bartered for alliances or prestige. The Laxdala saga, from the 13th century, conjures the figure of Melkorka, an Irish noblewoman, though Saga whispers doubt her royal blood seized in youth and bound to a Norse lord's will. Reduced to breeding vessel in the halls of her captor, her reticence when pressed for her name, she feigns muteness, as if to withhold even the fragment of her voice from the man who claimed her like a spoil of war, a silent insurrection etched in the saga's very silences. From these fractured vignettes emerge glimmers of defiance, veiled yet vital. Some, in the smothering hush of enforced voicelessness, they ferried culture across the chasm, a clandestine legacy woven into the fabric of their oppressor's world. Yet for now, the chronicle reels us back to the mist-shrouded banks of the Seine, where the longships groan under the weight of their human freight. Iron manacles gnaw at tender wrists as the captives are herded below decks, the rhythmic thud of oars slicing water heralding their severance from all that was known. The Frankish scribe Prudentius evokes the spectral grace of those vessels. To the women entombed in their bowels, the voyage unfolds as a descent into Stygian confinement, timbers pressing close as a tomb, the fetid reek of unwashed fear mingling with brine, and the gnawing certitude of being borne toward the frayed edges of existence itself. Then comes the veiled savagery, shrouded in the euphemisms of chronicle ink, dishonored or shamefully employed, yet we may piece together the fragments into a mosaic of muted horror. Envision the hush that descends in the aftermath of cries, as torch flames sputter low and the chieftain withdraws from the shadowed pavilion. A young bride from the ruined abbey perches upon a pallet of damp straw, her gown rent like a banner of surrender. She endures, breath shallow and eyes hollow, but the true blade twists deep. This was no incidental cruelty. In targeting women, the Norsemen inflicted wounds upon the collective honour of realms, fraying the bonds of kinship and faith alike. The Irish Annals of Ulster, in their stark entry for 821, capture the desolation of Dublin's marauders. They seized women through violence, ferrying them to the fleets, their lust a blight that withered the very soil. That terse invocation summons a landscape not merely pillaged, but paralysed by a shame that seeped into the earth like poison. And the spade of the archaeologist adds a macabre codicil. In trading enclaves like Birka in Sweden, iron fetters emerge from the peat, calibrated for the slender frames of women and the fragile forms of children, collars whose mechanisms, even now, yield a hollow snap under the careful hands of scholars. These restraints were no curiosities of craft, they were staples of commerce, ferrying the bound across storm-lashed seas with the dispassionate efficiency of timber cargoes or barrels of salt. Slave marts flourished in Hedeby, Dublin, Kiev, Emporia, teeming with the defeated, spouses, daughters, siblings rendered into anonymity. At time, from the teller's perch, it gleams as romance. To the ensnared, it was a gilded prison, its bars forged of obligation and erasure. Not all Norse adhered to this unrelenting creed. Records hint at unions born of mutual regard, concubines elevated to honoured stations, even the Graga's legal compendium, enshrining safeguards for the vulnerable, though enforcement wavered like mist before the gale. Yet in the fevered crucible of raids, where humiliation served as the keenest edge of warfare, such restraints dissolved. Dominion demanded the reduction of women to mere. The crescendo of this shadow war reveals itself in the raid's progression across fractured maps. Lindisfarne's cloistered nuns, violated in 793 amid the monks' frantic litanies, Francia's 9th-century tallies of abducted consorts from abbey fastnesses, Anglo-Saxon England's 10th-century dirges for defiled brides and daughters consigned to chains. In the Orient, where Russ's traders hewed watery thoroughfares to Constantinople's golden domes, hamlets awoke to find their women siphoned into conduits bound for Baghdad's bazaars. Whispers curdled into legend. Slavic lore murmurs of raiders baking loaves upon the supine forms of captives, a grotesque sacrament of scorn. Contemporary exegetes weigh the veracity, metaphor, or malice. Yet the tale's tenacity unveils a deeper verity. The spectre of women's torment etched itself as the primal dread in the folk psyche, a wound that time could not cauterize. Ponder, then, the compulsion to prey upon adversaries' consorts. Bullion might be wrested from crypts, herds driven through breached palisades, but women embodied more than fleeting gain. They were the crucibles of heritage, the unbroken chain of blood and custom. Plunder them, profane them, and you sever the enemy's tomorrow, wielding not steel but the cradle itself as your axe. Certain Jarls enshrined this doctrine. Harold Fairhair's saga, though penned in retrospect, reverberates with boasts of rivals women appropriated, a narrative of supremacy that thrilled Norse. Archaeology yields the most uncanny corroborations. In English barrows, Viking champions lie interred with baubles alien to their craft, bracelets of Celtic filigree, pins of Slavic subtlety, pendants evoking distant hearths, spoils doubtless stripped from women whose lives they upended. Contemplate the voiceless vigil of those relics, entombed in silence. Adornments once clasped in trembling fingers, woven into tresses scented with heather or pine, now mute testaments to trajectories shattered upon foreign strands, and behold the pivot of fates. Add 990. 1. The cataclysmic clash at Maldon, where Viking blades reap an Anglo-Saxon harvest, extorting tribute in coin and kind. Yet, shadowed by the gold lurks the human toll, a remnant. Old English verse mourns not solely Earl Byrhtnoth's fall, but in a verse of piercing chill, that wedded women would yield to foemen's the quill falters there, the scribe's hand arresting as if the parchment recoiled from the unspeakable. Ink blooms into an inky stain, a rupture where words dissolve into the void. It stands as a poetic lacuna, an omission gravid with the obscenities the writer dares not delineate, for every ear attuned to the verse comprehended the implication. It portended no honourable compact, no veiled nuptial rite. It evoked the peril murmured in hearthside cautions, the fate that bid daughters shun the twilight paths alone. When Viking prows grated upon Maldon's shingle, steel flashed in lethal arcs, but bondage endured as a sentence without term. For the Anglo-Saxon woman spared the spear at Maldon, existence might unravel into a grim procession, wrested by rough hands amid the melee, paraded to encampments ringed by leering sentinels, consigned to the hold's gloom for the Atlantic's royal. By journey's end, her identity, Ealdgith of the Weald, perhaps evaporated like breath on frost. She became merely thrall, a cipher in the ledger of the lost. Oftentimes, that thrall bore a legacy more spectral than her irons, a child quickened by her ravisher's seed. Those offspring matured not in the timbre of maternal tongues, but amid the clamour of Norse halls, some rising as berserkers, others as silver-tongued merchants. The sagas extol them as paragons of vigour, sired nobly through strife, yet between those paeans lingers the hollow of unbidden maternities, wombs conscripted as frontiers where triumph was etched in flesh. We glean this not from fancy, but from the sagas' offhand revelations. Landnámabók, the grand Icelandic tome of landfalls, inventories arrivals with their shadowed consorts, nameless woman from Ireland. Iceland's lineage today mirrors this fusion. A preponderance of Norse Y chromosomes entwined with mitochondrial strands from Irish glens and British vales in essence. Viking sires claiming foreign mates en masse. The excavator's trowel refines this portrait. In Jorvik, Norse England's bustling seat, 10th century female ossuaries disclose Celtic provenance in their marrow. Many perished near the bloom of 20, some in the tender cusp of adolescence. Their frames bear the toll of unremitting toil, osseous spurs from ceaseless strain, spinal arthritides in youths scarce past girlhood. These were no exalted brides wed into thrones. They were bondswomen, lashed to furrows and forges while suckling issue not of their choosing, their frames crumbling under the dual yoke of labour and lament. Nor was the brutality veiled in decorum. Annals attest that in monastic sacks, women endured outrage beneath the gaze of tonsured witnesses, the spectacle a deliberate desecration. To the Vikings, ferocity was pageant, a morality play where the mighties for the denizens of early medieval Francia or England, such profanations sundered not merely ramparts of stone, but the vault of divine harmony itself. The onslaughts upon Ely, Hamburg, Lindisfarne resound with a singular motif: women borne away into the tide. This commerce in flesh spanned fluvial veins and oceanic arteries. Islamic cartographers in Baghdad's scriptoria noted the Rus, those eastern Vikings herding thrall caravans down the Volga and Dnieper, their manifests dominated by female forms. The rationale was stark. In the opulent souks of Baghdad, Cordoba, or Constantinople, women commanded the loftiest tariffs, their value eclipsing spices or silks. Scribes duly log the preparations. Captives groomed for the block, plumped on pilfered provender, draped in silks ill suited to their station. arrayed upon scaffolds for the connoisseur's scrutiny, their worth tallied in dirhams, a currency of conquest. To myriad Norse overlords, this constituted the raid's quintessence, not glory's fleeting rush, but the aliment for a vast mercantile web. Yet amid the clamour of haggling, a fettered figure might murmur a cradle song from verdant dales. Pits yield collars of cunning forge work, their hasps demanding a proprietor's sole key, a perpetual seal, etched not for transience, but eternity. Scholars handle them with ritual gravity today, the resonant clank evoking a collective hush, as if the gallery strains to hear the phantom breaths constrained within. That metallic toll was the dirge that paced women's days, each inhalation a chime against captivity's unyielding ring. The sagas, Egil's saga unfurls its heroes' vaunts of raid-won women, yet elides the machinery of misery. He equates a consort's seizure to a coffer of coin, a mere flourish of fate. This narrative hush, perhaps, inflicts the subtlest wound, the subalterns' testimonies effaced, their odysseys refracted through the lips of those who forged their fetters. Yet resonances persist, seeping like smoke beneath history's threshold. Slavic oral weaves depict Varangians, the sea-wolves probing captives' submission through macabre trials, compelling them to knead dough upon their flesh or bind them in pelts for days in ritual abasement. Pundits pass these as fables flourish, hyperbole's haze, yet folklore oft distills atrocities' essence truer than vellum's varnish. The lurid blooms into lore, the lore into legacy's lingering chill, moulding cultures for generations in its mould. What, then, of the captives' inner tempests? Precious few autographs survive. Most were schooled in illiteracy, their pleas stifled by decree. But osteology articulates in calcium cipher, an Orkney term laid to rest, sans finery, no clasp, no brooch, no token of autonomy. She merits a scant pit at the necropolis's fringe, her thraldom's echo resounding even in the grave's indifferent hush. Venture eastward to Byzantium's luminous citadel, Constantinople, where Vikings transmuted into Varangians' Byzantine bulwarks clad in imperial panoply. Norse lays trumpet their tenure in those marbled halls. Yet Hellenic ledgers allude to a murkier entourage. The guardsmen shadowed by thralls, women dragooned to minister amid the empire's splendor. Envision the corridors of porphyry and pearl, frescoes aglow with seraphim, and trailing a flaxen sentinel, a consort from alien climes, her footfalls muffled, her stare fixed upon the mosaic's chill gleam. The Olaf saga yields a vignette of discomforting candor. Bondmaids in Iceland, rested young, manumitted after spans of gracious service, a euphemism that curdles the tongue, as if clemency could blanch the ledger of endured indignities. Manumitted, aye, but progeny stamped with the Lord's lineage, maternal names demoted to marginalia. Recede for perspective. Across 3 centuries, from 793's clarion to 1066's dusk, Viking forays and footholds upended the destinies of myriad women, tens of thousands. What, in our epoch, does it signify to peer so protractedly into this chasm of woe? It compels acknowledgement that hegemony inscribes itself not solely in triumphal friezes or regnal rosters, but in the muted, seismic agonies of women denied quill, denied chronicle, denied epic verse. They linger at history's penumbra ankles cinched in gyves, gorgets chill upon the throat, cradle songs pilfered by gales from the German Sea, yet pursue their contours with diligence, and resilience gleams through the gloom. Some outlived their ordeals to instill in progeny vestiges of natal lore, subtly eroding the homogeneity their masters craved. Others elected terminus in defiant plunge to fluvial or briny abysses, spurning the prow's inexorable pull, and others for when annalists consigned wives to foemen's hands, they deemed it a curt cipher for calamity. Unwittingly, they etched its perpetuity. Those phrases, splintered into vellum-like thorns, lacerate across the aeons. From Malden's bloodied strand, the lens sweeps eastward, along the slate-grey serpents of Eastern Europe's waterways, the Volga and Dnieper, where Norse keels furrowed wakes through Slav, Bulgar, and Finnic thickets. To those woodland and steppe-dwellers, the prows presaged not mere armament, but an insatiable craving for flesh. The calculus was unvarying. In Constantinople's intrigues, Baghdad's opulence, or Al-Andalus's alcazars, youthful women transmuted into tender prime commodities, rivaling myrrh or samite in allure. Thus, for these women, subjugation's curtain did not descend with the raid's fading pyres. It ascended into an interminable drama, trudging processions with palms pinioned, consigned to Hull's sway, vectored toward alien sovereignties, alien appellations. The Arab envoy Ibn Rusta, charting Rus circuits in the late 9th century, limns their commerce in victims were groomed for the rostrum, fattened on forage, swathed in finery, filched from fallow homes, promenaded through Byzantine or Abbasid emporia. When a purchaser's digits grazed a captive's jaw to assay her vitality, as one might a steed's teeth, her antecedent existence had vaporized into myth. Summon the desolation of a razed Slavic stead in the raid's wake, no codex to mourn it, perchance no ballad to bear its grief. Yet the region's strata furnish intimations, demographic fissures, cohorts of the young vanished, sepulchres skewed in their silences. That void constitutes attestation more eloquent than artifact. Women effaced, spirited into a lattice that appraised them as adjuncts, not so. Byzantium's chanceries, austere in their ledgers, omitted onomastics. They materialize in fiscal folios, existences distilled to quanta. 3 damsels acquired by Andreas, 1 spouse, 2 daughters conveyed to X-factors. These jottings persist in tattered Greek scraps salvaged from Ravenna's ruins, Mediterranean inks murmuring of women excised from natal topographies, and their issue, kindled in estrangement? In the Levant, such progeny of Viking and local captives oft recirculated through servitudes wheel northward to Scandinavia's steadings Hedeby, Kaupang, where the trowel discloses enclosures, stockades of splintered pine, airless as oubliettes, harboring ossuaries of youthful women, phalanges splintered by restraint, dentition eroded by duress and dearth. This was no peripheral facet of Norse polity, it underpinned the edifice. Thralls were not ephemera, they were the sinews of thrift, the coinage of clans, the scaffold of status. Absent them, Norse dominion could scarce have burgeoned so voraciously, and upon whom devolved the direst onus? Women, inexorably. Iceland's Gragas, transcribed in the 13th century, lays bare the asymmetry. A thrall, woman, chattel absolute, her battery by a stranger a larceny. Yet should her liege assail or compel her to his bed, statute averts its gaze. In that reticence resounds the chorus of 3 centuries' unchronicled plaints, voices embargoed by edict. Conjure the Varangians anew, those colossi in Byzantine harness, oath-bound to safeguard the Porphyrogenitos, loom as demigods, yet dogging their greaves were the women they had commandeered, exotic consorts and bondmaids, nestled in the interstices of the city of the world's desire. An Arabic chronicler, Al-Masudi, indicts the Rus's processions through Pontic harbours en route to auction. Maidens paraded amid choral veils to muffle their dirges. Reflect upon that stratagem the traders cognizant that lament might lacerate the bazaar's veneer. So they swathe sorrow in sonorous guise, rendering anguish inaudible beneath lute's lament and cadence's compulsion. Hegemony transcended sinew, it orchestrated the ether, muting the primal keen of humanity. Yet through that orchestrated hush, endurance flickered. Excavators detect vestiges. Not solely Gaelic to the Scalds, these bondswomen merit scant stanza. The damsel from the Hebrides or the Irish thrall, tokens in the trove. Yet to historiography, their reticence accretes like deluge. When you tread Dublin's Wood Quay dig today, the phantom tumult of an 11th century mart assails hustlers hawking, and rearward, phalanxes of women with downcast stares, frames rigid in apprehension's vice. A pernicious canard adheres to the Volga's vein. Ibn Fadlan, eyewitness to a... Thus, when codices consign wives to foemen's hands, they evoke epochs of women embalmed in hush, a syndicate so vast, so gelid, that daughters of the Seine, the Shannon, the Volga traced congruent odysseys of obeisance. Let historiography's gaze retract once more. An Icelandic buyer, AD 950, tots gambol without, towheads agleam in flambeau's flicker. Within, a woman tends the blaze, palms calused as bark, gaze adrift on horizons unseen. She hails not from these fjords, her timbre estranges the Fiel's hush. Gaelic lilt, but chronicle demurs, for ostions and inks abjure utter quiescence. Recollection is labyrinthine. Muteness possesses its vernacular, oft shrieking acuter than utterance. Iceland's steading footings harbour intonations of extraneous dams unmarked, unmoored. Sagas, drafted by scions centuries hence, affect amnesia on spousal provenience, a disquieting dumb show, testimonial in its lacuna. The fabulists shunned recall, for reminiscence indicted their veins with rapine's residue. Yet the verse betrays Ulfra's woman of the West, deceptively demure, perchance vaunting, yet underpinning it. The verity was no vellum vector. Verity was violation incarnate. Envision Vinland's verge, the Norse thrust transatlantic, Saga, sung as Odyssey of intrepids. We hail the wayfarers grizzled, gale-tempered. Yet who scaffolded those tenuous turf-sod holds, oft loathly, who lugged from gelid rills, flensed beasts, stitched canvas from Tusker's hide? Amid them, verily, thralls vectored from European strands or snared in nascent forays, bondmaids footnote in the epic, umbrae, but attuned to those umbrae, and they resolve as sinews, nourishers, haberdashers. This schema, the effacement of feminine torment, courses as obsidian filament through Norse nexus. Sovereigns perjure by stratagems, jarls by jousts, navigators by nautical feats. Women? They attenuate to annotations, seized, manumitted post, prolongation, espoused to the hearth. Yet Calvaria, codons, and clay shards susurrate otherwise. Women omnipresent, women the plinth. Revert to Dublin, Ireland's Norse nexus. The delve disgorges distaffs, spindles, warps feminine forgework, much from captives compelled to transmute wool to wampum for overlords. Those vestments voyaged afar for specie, procuring falchions to... Thus, Norse hegemony narrates not solely in keels and kedges, it interlades in worsted, hue of compulsion's carmine. To calibrate its compass, heed the reckoners. By millennium's cusp, a tithe or more of Scandinavia's souls were thralls. Traverse a Thorpe, every 10th visage unfree, unwarded, and as women preponderated in the pale, Demenes thrived on suborned spouses' sweat. This occult pedestal evaded skaldic scrutiny. They hymned hulls, helmsmen, deities. They cognized the verity Norse wheel reared on penumbral parturients. But they elected elision. Elision eased. Elision enshrined esteem. But elision endures not eternally. By the 11th's ebb, the White Christ's creed permeated the fjords, importing equity's edict. Clerics invade, 'gainst carnal captives. Creakingly, thraldom's gears ground to groan. Yet not ere 3 centuries tribulation had leavened the loam, the lays, the legacies of legions. Now, reclaim the prelude, Paris, 845. The damsel dashes unshod o'er mire. She fathoms not yet Baghdad's bazaars, Dublin's Donnybrooks, Constantinople's phalangites, Iceland's tacit crofts, peopled by her issue's shades. In that instant, she comprehends soul frenzy, conflagration. For her, the onslaught's singular. One gloaming, one garth, one grapple. Yet athwart Europe, athwart centuries, myriad matrons reprise that gloaming exponentiated, reverberant, resonant. To scribes it calcified to canon, rapine, redemption, ruin. And I, consorts to adversaries' avarice. That trope no trope, 'twas tactile. Palms that clenched as clamps, palms that propelled to prows, palms that palmed as pelf. Contemporaries oft idealize the Norse. Cuirassed corsairs, keratin, cornuted chimeras, brutality burnished from the bard. Yet beneath the varnish lurks the interred indictment. Raid's rigor smote severest not hoard halls or cloister crests, but feminine forms their Yet the paramount parable, the tribulation of the distaff that scaffolded Norse splendor, was the one they abjured to author. Perchance hence osteology importunes, perchance hence manacles resurface, rusted remonstrance, codons continue candor, tilth tenaciously clasps cuffs, gorgets, gessos, for when vellum veils, the verdant vouches, and perchance that the profoundest verity, Vikings deemed to deify via dazzle, instead, they deified via the dolors of the dumbed. Envision ultimate eidolon, an Icelandic coat. The hearth hisses. Offspring slumber. The woman at the trestle trills her muted motif, estranging to the eye. She shall perish in that pale. Her grand progeny shall swagger as unmingled Norse, heedless of the helot who husbanded their hearth. But historiography heeds, for relics repine. And so, the veritable veiled chronicle of the Norse transcends audacious assaults or argent's allure. 'Tis the ineffable elegy of subjugate. Hark trans the trecenturies, trans the rills, trans the sable sails shearing broom. You nigh discern it still, the slap of unshod soles on sop, the wheeze of bosoms afire with alarm, the serrate sigh as gyves grind shut,